Welcome to Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel along with my co host Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Hello, Keith. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good.
Hello.
Um, well, we've got a very special guest today, so why don't we just jump right in and you can introduce him, Ray?
Be glad to. We've got Lee Riedinger with us today. Lee's a retired professor from the University of Tennessee. And I'll tell you two little stories in introduction to him. First one is, a number of years ago now, at ETech one morning that Lee said he'd like me to co-teach with him at UT, a course on the Manhattan Project. Well, we talked about that for a year or two, I think, Lee, before we finally did it. But eventually we did teach a course. Actually, Lee taught the course. I told stories. But when we got through, I told him, I said, Lee, you've got enough information here that's not widely known that you could make a book out of this. Now, he took that idea and expanded on it. And because of his personal involvement in the UT Battelle contract to operate the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and actually worked at the lab after that contract was won, he expanded that thought that I had about the Manhattan Project into the relationship between the University of Tennessee and Oak Ridge. And the more we got into it after he formed a writing group, the more we began to learn and realize that much of what we were learning and finding out about, I mean, Lee knew it, he just had to find the references for it. Much of that had never been documented. And so out of that, we've produced a book, and Lee, you'll have the name up in a minute, but it's Critical Connections Between the University of Tennessee and Oak Ridge. So, Lee, we're glad to have you with us this morning and look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you, Ray. Thank you, Keith. It's a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy doing anything with Ray Smith, including writing a book. So
thank you.
I am honored to join this venue.
Good.
So should I start, Ray?
Yes, go ahead and share your screen and let's learn about the book. Looks good. Yep.
Yes, I would like to tell you about this partnership that has extended for over 80 years now between the university and Oak Ridge. And specifically, it's the people and the events that has enabled this partnership to grow so well over 80 years and make UT what it is and contribute to what Oak Ridge is. And that's the story I want to tell you in the next little bit. Yes, Ray is right. We've written a book. This was not easy. It took 5 years. I guess books take a while. And Ray has been crucial for this. His stories are, of course, phenomenal. And we've included a number of them in the book. It's Critical Connections about the UT and Oak Ridge from the dawn of the atomic age to the present. And it's due to come out this summer via UT Press. So we're looking forward to finally having this on the street. It's exciting. And the story starts in 1940. Gee whiz, in 1940, Oak Ridge did not exist. Oak Ridge was a set of small farming communities. It's important to the story that Norris Dam had just been completed in 1936 and Watts Bar in 39. And so for the first time, there was a rather abundant electricity in the Tennessee Valley. However, World War II started, the Manhattan Project started, and rather quickly, 3,000 people had to leave these small farming communities so that their land, 59,000 acres, could be used for this new project, this new secret laboratory, set of laboratories. And that happened quickly. People had 2 weeks to vacate their homes of generations and go somewhere else. At the same time, in 1940, UT was not a very good university. We had no PhD programs at UT in 1940. There was little faculty research at that time. The problem was the state of Tennessee did not see a real need for higher education. and did not invest in it sufficiently. And James Hoskins, the president for 12 years, was not particularly good at selling the value of higher education to state legislators. The state viewed higher education as an elitist thing, not important for the common man. And so, however, in spite of these poor academic standards, we had good football. And indeed, in 1940, UT under Robert Nealon were the national champs. So in a sense, UT needed the Manhattan Project. It needed Oak Ridge to be formed in order to advance, especially in science and engineering. I come from the physics department. I spent 49 years on the physics faculty until I retired in 2019. In 1940, it was a small department. It was led by Kenneth Hertel, and he observed as department head in physics the cut in the state budget in 34 and decided that he and other faculty needed to do something to show that the university had benefit for the state. And so he started research on cotton fibers. Cotton was an important crop in Tennessee, especially at that time. And he did research on how to understand the strength of cotton fibers, how to improve the strength, and thus improve the cotton crop. Well, that led to the first patent that he wrote, first patent given to UT in 1939. And Kenneth Hertel helped form the UT Research Corporation in order to foster more patents. Alvin Nielsen joined the faculty in physics in 35. He later became head of the physics department and dean of the college. And indeed, our physics building is named after Alvin. Kay Way joined the faculty in 39, the physics faculty. She got her undergraduate degree from Columbia, her PhD in nuclear physics from North Carolina in 38. And then William Pollard was another crucial member of the physics department. He actually got his undergraduate math degree from UT in 32, went off to Rice to get his PhD, and came back to join the faculty in 1936. This was an intense time, of course, in the early 40s. Experiments in Europe indicated that when you hit uranium with neutrons, something funny happened. Initially, the funny thing happening was thought to be the formation of elements beyond uranium. Uranium is the heaviest element in nature, in the ground. But then more experiments, especially in Berlin, showed that when you hit uranium with a neutron, you actually cause uranium to split into two, which we now call nuclear fission. And that was a shock when that seminal experiment was done in 1939, or rather December of 38. The following 2 years saw a lot of experiments to understand what was happening. And now we know that when a neutron hits specifically uranium-235, a small part of natural uranium, that compound nucleus splits into two pieces with enormous release of energy, 200 MeV. And if you could harness that nuclear energy from the fission of 1 kilogram of uranium, that'd be equivalent to the chemical energy released by burning 2 million kilograms of coal. An important part of this understanding in the early 40s was that also 2 or 3 neutrons are emitted when uranium fissions, which then gives the possibility of a chain reaction. That is, for example, a bomb. Enrico Fermi was a Nobel laureate from Italy, and his wife was Jewish, so he got out to accept the Nobel Prize in 38, and then came to the U.S. To stay out of Italy, and he worked at Columbia initially, then came to Chicago, and in 42, he and his colleagues made a pile of uranium with graphite to see if you could start a chain reaction of fission in uranium. This was natural uranium, a lot of it, 58 tons or so of uranium oxide. The graphite was there to slow down the energy of the neutrons emitted in fission that would enhance the possibility that they would cause other uranium nuclei to fission. That is a chain reaction. This worked. On December 2nd of 42. This pile of uranium graphite went critical. A chain reaction occurred. Fermi only let it run for 4 minutes. There was no cooling. There was no shielding. If he let it run for 4 hours, it would have melted down and probably killed the observers.
Let me ask a question. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
That's right.
How did he stop it? I don't know that.
He put in cadmium rods. Cadmium is very good at absorbing neutrons. So, and see the guy at the bottom of the drawing there. He's got his hand on a rod, a cadmium rod, and so when Fermi said stop it, then he inserted that guy down below, inserted cadmium rods to suck up the neutrons, and the chain reaction was then stopped.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Well,
Lee, let me add to that just a moment. You've heard the term scram?
Yes.
You know that where that term comes from?
I forget.
It comes from the way they had rigged that operation up to stop the criticality. And let me see just a minute and see if I can't get it right. You know, artificial intelligence is just something great now.
Well, it does not surpass your intelligence.
No. SCRAM stands for secure. No, that's not right. Most widely used term, supercritical reactor axeman.
Okay.
Oh.
All right, supercritical reactor axeman, and that's because they had an axe there to cut a rope if they needed to drop that cadmium into there quickly. But
yeah, that's right.
They also had a controlled way of doing it.
Right. That was the fail-safe.
Yes.
Shutdown process. Yes. Interesting. I need to.
That's the way it says it here. Safety cut rope axeman, a response Enrico Fermi gave to a logger when asked what scram means. So that's where it comes from.
How about that?
Okay.
Once
Sorry
again,
to interrupt.
once again, I learned from a Ray Smith story. Perhaps true even.
Oh yeah, maybe.
Well, after Fermi succeeded in this experiment, the next step was to scale this up. Include cooling, include shielding, see if you could make a pile run continuously. Why? Well, the idea is that this is a way to breed plutonium-239 in a reactor. Experiments at Berkeley in the 30s showed that plutonium-239 does fission, but plutonium is not found in nature. So you have to make it. And the way you can make it is by have neutrons hit uranium-238, the abundant isotope, and then you make plutonium-239. And this was a possible way to make a bomb based upon plutonium-239 produced in a reactor. It was not logical to scale up Fermi's experiment in the Chicago area. Too many people, too big of a city. So the Manhattan Project leaders came to Oak Ridge, very quickly bought 59,000 acres in September of 42. There was local supply of water and electricity. It was out in the woods. You could nestle new facilities between the ridges and maybe nobody would notice. And so it all started very quickly. 3 sites. Y12 was the most crucial during the Manhattan Project. I will tell you about that, making calutrons to enrich uranium in the isotope 235. That is the one that fissions. X10 site was where the first reactor was built in order to produce plutonium-239 or show how to do it. And then K25 was also built during the Manhattan Project, another way to enrich uranium by gaseous diffusion. That did not bear fruit enough during the war, but it became the workhorse of our uranium enrichment industry for 30 years. Ernest Lawrence was the Berkeley Nobel laureate that had invented the cyclotron, a way to bend charged particles and accelerate them in a circular device. He used that principle to build a caluitron. And so you see in the diagram, if you ionize uranium chloride and then put it through a strong magnetic field, the charge to mass ratio is different. All the uranium ions have the same charge, but the mass of uranium-235, the desired isotope, is different than uranium-238, the common isotope. And in that way, with many, many segments of calutrons, they were able to produce 40 or 50 kilograms of uranium-235, enriched in uranium-235, a massive project that took a lot of time, didn't know if it would work, but it was done. And Ray has spoken often about the calutron girls who controlled these devices that did all this separation in many, many calutrons at Y12. As the uranium was enriched and harvested, it was sent by Army guys dressed as businessmen by train to Los Alamos, where the atomic bomb was designed and built. X-10 was where the world's first reactor was built. Once again, to show how to make plutonium-239 and to show how you can enrich or you can extract the plutonium-239, small quantities of it, from these large quantities of the fuel elements, which are mainly uranium-238. That project worked, and that was completed. The graphite reactor went critical in November of 43. So you see, things happen quickly in the Manhattan Project, and that's because we were terrified that the Germans would figure this out first. During the Manhattan Project, during World War II, Hertel stayed at UT to run a program to train people in different aspects of science and engineering for the war effort. Nielsen went to Ohio State to work on Manhattan Project-related issues. Kay Way went to Chicago, worked at the University of Chicago in Eugene Wigner's group. Pollard went to Columbia to work on gaseous diffusion. 6 other faculty work on various other defense issues. So the department was emptied out, of course, during the war. But then it worked. The 2 atomic bombs were developed, dropped on Japan in August of 45. The war ended, and people started to return to work. Pollard returned to the UT physics faculty from Columbia. Kay Way decided to work at Oak Ridge rather than coming back to the faculty. But right away, the need became clear in Oak Ridge. Martin Whittaker was the head of the Clinton laboratories. That's what X-10 was called. And he was concerned about keeping his research workforce intact. Most of them had been pulled out of graduate schools and wanted to go back to finish their PhD work after the war ended. He needed courses to be taught at Oak Ridge to help these people continue to get their degrees and stay in working at Oak Ridge. So there was already in September, the war had just ended. Already in September, there was a dinner meeting called by Fred Smith, the dean of the graduate school at UT, including Whittaker, including the head of the chemistry division, and they discussed the need for on-site graduate courses, initially in physics, to be taught at Oak Ridge. And these first two graduate physics courses were taught on-site already in October of 45. And that's the real beginning of the UT Oak Ridge partnership, I think. Also at that time, around in September of 45, Kay Way came back for a social visit to UT. Robert Bortz, a friend of hers, was head of the chemical engineering department. He hosted a party for Kay Way. And at that party, she said, well, I want you to know that around Chicago, a group of universities is talking about banding together to leverage the research capabilities of what would soon become Argonne National Lab. The wartime effort, the metallurgical lab, it was called at Chicago, would be evolved into a national laboratory, and universities around there were lining up to see how they could leverage those research facilities for their faculty and grad students. Well, why not do that around Oak Ridge? She asked. That was a good idea. And Hertel and Pollard met with the president of UT, who bought into the idea. That then followed a November 8th dinner meeting at the Andrew Johnson Hotel in downtown Knoxville. Dean Smith and Kenneth Hertel and Pollard, 6 staff from ORNL, from Clinton Labs, rather. And they then organized a December 5th conference at the Andrew Johnson Hotel, where they brought 9 other universities to town to talk about how to leverage the research capabilities in Oak Ridge for these 10 universities and their faculties. Pollard was appointed as the chair of the committee to take the next step on some kind of a consortium. Well, the consortium came about, and by October of 1946, 14 universities, including UT and Vanderbilt, banded together to form the Oak Ridge Institute of Nuclear Studies, a crucial step of having universities involved in Oak Ridge. This expanded the offerings that UT did of graduate courses in Oak Ridge, now also in chemistry and math, chemical engineering, for people working in Oak Ridge. And so the UT Oak Ridge Resident Graduate Program started in an official way. Courses were taught at Oak Ridge High. And so thus ORNS, this Institute of Nuclear Studies, came about and played a role. It played a role in arguing for the continuation of Clinton laboratories after World War II, because many assumed Oak Ridge would be closed. The war had been won, the mission had been accomplished. Many assumed that these facilities would be closed, but the lobbying effort of these 14 universities was crucial for convincing the US government to continue funding Oak Ridge. Contractors were different. During the Manhattan Project, Monsanto operated Clinton laboratories. What became Union Carbide operated Y-12 and K-25. In January of 47, the Atomic Energy Commission was formed. It then had responsibility for Oak Ridge instead of the Army. By May of 47, AEC decided to replace Monsanto. They did not have very good marks as a managing contractor of X10. Then there was a year of uncertainty. National labs at Oregon and Brookhaven, Oregon and Chicago, Brookhaven, New York, were forming, run by university consortia. And so ORNS University said, why not us? Maybe we should manage Clinton labs. However, the AEC and William Pollard felt that they were not ready because these universities had just banded together. The expertise wasn't there. And so Union Carbide was chosen to manage all 3 Oak Ridge sites, which lasted until 1984. So my point is that UT missed the boat in 1947 of having a major role in managing facilities in Oak Ridge. However, new things for the partnership did progress. The picture there is of the atomic bomb that was detonated in July of 45 in the desert in New Mexico. The Trinity test, it was called. That's Norris Bradbury that's shown there. He led that effort. He later became director of Los Alamos National Lab. That was a plutonium bomb, just to see if this would work. And of course, anybody who's seen Oppenheimer movie saw that sequence of pictures that bomb did work. They were stunned how well it worked. Cattle had been moved off of that site, the Trinity site, but still wind took the fallout cloud over and 50 cows were affected and their hair turned gray. They couldn't sell them, so the AEC sent the cows to Oak Ridge. And there was a new entity, the UT AEC Agricultural Research Lab, formed. This was an early effort of UT doing research in Oak Ridge on agricultural things. The 50 cows were brought there in 48. They were studied and they were found to be normal. The gray hair was replaced by normal hair. Calves were born, they were normal. The milk was not radioactive. And so it showed that these cows, although exposed, had no long-term impact. Also at the Agriculture Research Lab, there was a critical experiment that led to nuclear medicine. The NIH was involved in this. They wanted this done. Radioactive gallium-72 was produced in a graphite reactor and then driven down the road to the Ag Research Lab, injected into a pig. The idea was to see if this radioactive gallium would be concentrated in bone in the pig, and could it be used to kill a tumor that might be in the bone? And it worked. It did concentrate in the pig's bone. And that is really, some people say, the beginning of this enormous field of nuclear medicine. The 50s saw great increase in nuclear associated courses in various departments at UT, not only physics, but chemistry and engineering, even sociology and poli-sci had courses related to nuclear things. More courses were offered at Oak Ridge by UT. And importantly, the first PhD programs were formed, first in chemistry and physics, then in botany and chemical engineering. And that was largely because of Oak Ridge being next door and people in Oak Ridge needing an outlet to finish their PhDs. For the first time, radioisotopes were available for faculty doing research at UT. New grants came to the university. And many Oak Ridgers who were hired in the 50s with master's degrees got their PhDs at UT, some of the best and brightest. Sam Hurst, an entrepreneur. Sheldon Datz got the Fermi Award, I think, from the Department of Energy, one of the best and brightest. So these four and many others finished their PhDs at UT in the 50s, which gave a real impetus to graduate education at UT. And also in 1951, there were 29 UT faculty hired part-time as Oak Ridge consultants at the three plants. And this is really the beginning of the shared researchers between UT and Oak Ridge that became joint faculty 34 years later. Alvin Weinberg, my goodness, I call him the greatest Oak Ridger.
And rightly so.
Right. He came from Chicago in Eugene Wigner's group. He got his PhD, University of Chicago, came to Oak Ridge. He led the development as lab director. He was lab director for 17 years of 9 different reactor concepts at Oak Ridge in the 50s. For example, the reactor became the workhorse of the nuclear Navy, reactors that became the centerpiece of the commercial nuclear power industry. Because of this emphasis at Oak Ridge, UT formed its own nuclear engineering department in 57. And now that department is one of the 2 or 3 most highly ranked nuclear engineering departments in the US. Also, Alvin wrote a paper in the journal Science in 1962 saying that, gee whiz, national labs should contribute somehow to the education of grad students in science and engineering. The country needs more. National labs have great expertise and wonderful people. Why not have joint faculty between O&L, for example, and other universities? Why not have joint institutes between the lab and universities? Well, those were ideas that were too soon, but all that did happen for 40 years later. And I helped develop a lot of those programs, joint faculty and joint institutes between UT and O&L. Alvin knew the head of NIH, and together they formed the UT Oak Ridge Graduate School of Biomedical Science, based in the biology division at Oak Ridge, which was housed at Y12. The students lived in Oak Ridge. The courses were taught by Oak Ridgers in the biology division. They worked on research at Oak Ridge. So it was part of UT, but it was wholly contained within Oak Ridge. The school lasted for 30 years, educated a lot of students in biomedical engineering and science. And that was really the forerunner of something I started in 2010 called the Breslin Center. Jack Gibbons, another iconic name in Oak Ridge and at UT, came to the physics division after he got his PhD at Duke in 54. And Alvin Weinberg asked him to start an environmental program at the lab. This nuclear physicist was asked to start an environmental program. And Jack started research at ORNL and energy and environment things. In 73, he was called to Washington to be the first director of the Office of Energy Conservation. In 75, he returned to Tennessee and he created at UT the first energy center, the Energy, Environment, and Resources Center. So that had a huge impact on the university. 79, he went back to Washington to head the Office of Technology Assessment. And then from 93 to 98, he was Bill Clinton's science advisor. So an iconic name who did a lot to foster the partnership between the university and Oak Ridge. Many areas at UT have grown because of the partnership with Oak Ridge. I mentioned nuclear engineering, ecology, and the ecology program was started at ORNL in the 60s. And UT then leveraged that to start its own ecology program. I mentioned energy environmental research led by Jack Gibbons. My field is nuclear physics. One reason I stayed at UT so long was that I could do fine experiments at ORNL in nuclear physics, and the same for our atomic physics faculty. So there's a whole list of areas where over the decades, UT has become a far better research university because of the capabilities in Oak Ridge and the partnership with Oak Ridge. A new opportunity came. Union Carbide in 82 announced they would not continue managing the 3 facilities in Oak Ridge. UT formed a task force to consider a bid. I was on that task force. In October of 82, Lamar Alexander was governor, and he wanted a new idea that he could carry to Washington to benefit UT, whether it won the management contract or not. 3 of us physics faculty, Paul Hire, a native Oak Ridger, and Ivan Sellen and me, we sat around Paul's breakfast table one Sunday morning and drew up a crazy idea, a distinguished scientist program. Crazy because we proposed that each of these jointly hired top scientists would be paid a crazy salary of $100,000. That was 3 times my salary at that time. A professor, it was higher than the salary of the university president or the lab director. But we figured we needed that to attract the best and brightest to a new kind of joint appointment between Oak Ridge and UT. Jack Reese was our chancellor. He sent the idea to Lamar Alexander, who went to see Howard Baker in Tennessee, who was the Senate Majority Leader. Baker called in DOE Secretary Hodel and asked him to do this to support a distinguished scientist program. And a DOE secretary listens to what the majority leader says, and he said, yes, sir, we will do that. And so we did benefit. We dropped out of the competition to manage the facilities because in January of 83, DOE decided they would not split the contracts. They would keep all the contracts together. And we knew we did not have a chance, therefore. But Herman Postma and Jack Reese agreed to start a distinguished scientist program. And Martin Marietta was chosen to be the director or the manager of the 4 plants. And they agreed to support this idea of hiring top faculty jointly. So we missed the boat there to engage in management of facilities, but the opportunity finally came 15 years later. It was a challenge, however, to convince top faculty to take this newfangled distinguished scientist offer. 1983 and 84, I spent a year working as Howard Baker's science advisor in DC. He was the majority leader. And I proposed to Senator Baker, well, you could help a great deal by having a ceremony. And it worked. A ceremony to announce the hiring of these first two distinguished scientists. That occurred in June of 84 in the Mansfield room of the U.S. Capitol, hosted by Senator Baker. The press was there. The governor was there. Many officials. Representative Al Gore was there. And that worked. And the first two, George Birch and Jared Mahan, agreed to join this program. And we made 20 such hires over the following 15 years. Lamar Alexander played such a heavy role, important role for building this partnership. He was governor for 2 terms, and he was the first of 5 consecutive governors to directly invest in the UT Oak Ridge partnership. He committed funds for the new Distinguished Scientist program. He initiated a program. We got the first award of a Centers of Excellence at universities in Tennessee for the Science Alliance, the first official joint program between UT and Oak Ridge. And the 3 of us shown there, Russell Robinson from Oak Ridge, Joe Hamilton from Vanderbilt, and me from UT, were the leaders of this first joint institute. Once again, this was Alvin Weinberg's idea 22 years earlier, and it finally came to fruition in 1984, the first joint institute between UT and Oak Ridge, also including Vanderbilt. Then 14 years later, it happened again. The rumor was circulating that Lockheed Martin would not be renewed by DOE as a managing contractor for Oak Ridge National Lab. The contracts had been split in 1995 or 6. So now we could focus on trying to win the contract to manage ORNL, which is right in our sweet spot. That was the lab where we had the most partnerships. Joe Johnson was the president. He formed a task force chaired by Homer Fisher and me. We interviewed many possible partners with whom we would conduct a bid. We knew we needed a partner because we did not have capability at UT to manage a reactor, manage a big laboratory. Just after November of '98, Bill Madia from Pacific Northwest National Lab came to town. We met in Joe's office, Joe Johnson's office, and UT Battelle LLC was born. And we agreed we would write a proposal together. Next July, Governor Sundquist committed $12 million to construct new joint institutes at Oak Ridge, should we win, in areas of joint strength: nanoscience, biological science, computer science. We made our proposals orally in August, and in October of '99, we got a phone call to say that we had won. And April 1st of 2000, we, UT Battelle, took over management of ORNL. 3 of us from UT went to serve on the initial leadership team. I was the deputy director for science and technology, Billy Starr, head of communications, and Frank Harris, the associate lab director for biology. And so 60 years of not even having any PhD programs, the University of Tennessee succeeded in winning the contract to manage ORNL. It's just a remarkable progression. Supercomputing benefited greatly from the partnership. Thomas Zachariah took the lead on building supercomputers at ORNL with Department of Energy money. Jaguar, 1 petaflop operations per second, 1 billion operations per second. Boggles the mind. That was initiated in 2007. Then Thomas was a part-time person at UT in this period so that he could take the lead on a proposal to the NSF, the National Science Foundation. And that worked, and UT got a big award, the biggest until that time, for a supercomputer funded by the National Science Foundation, Kraken. And that's set in the same computer room at Oak Ridge because of the large amount of space and cooling. And so this was a big success for the university, leveraging Oak Ridge. In the decade of the 2000s and 2010s, three people were very important for building a partnership. Phil Bredesen was a two-term governor. Jimmy Cheek was chancellor for 8 years. Tom Mason served a magical 10 years as director of Oak Ridge National Lab. Bredesen took the lead in getting new money to UT for the governor's chairs, a new version of the Distinguished Scientist Program. He invested at UT in biofuels and a solar farm. And in 2010, he had this idea, a vague idea, for some kind of a joint PhD, truly joint, between UT and ORNL and something related to energy. And Jimmy Cheek and Tom Mason resonated on this. They formed a task force. They brought me in to lead this. State government gave us $6 million to kickstart this. And we started the Bredesen Center. And we formed two PhD programs between UT and ORNL jointly, first in energy science and engineering, and the second in data science and engineering. Huge steps in the partnership. Well, in recent decades, three of the top areas that have evolved in this partnership are, one is on additive manufacturing. That's a big area where one can start from scratch, lay down layers of materials instead of machining a piece of some kind of widget by chiseling out and wasting a lot of material. You do additive manufacturing, laying down one layer after another to build up something big, like the car there that President Obama drove when he visited one time in 2015. We hired at UT Suresh Babu and then Uday Vidya in 2015, two UT governor's chairs with Oak Ridge that are leaders of this additive manufacturing area. Supercomputing has continued to be a strength of Oak Ridge and UT. Frontier is being built at 1.5 exaflops. That's a billion operations per second. Boggles the mind.
Yes.
And then element 117 was discovered. The target was made in the reactor at Oak Ridge. Berkelium 249 was taken to Dubna for 6 months of experiments. And element 17, one of the two heaviest elements of nature, was discovered. They don't live long, they live for microseconds, but that was discovered. And because state of Tennessee, Oak Ridge, UT, Vanderbilt were involved, that element is called Tennessine, after the state of Tennessee. Also, in the last 15 years, the partnership with Y12 has been rekindled and reborn. Y12 is not as much of a research laboratory as Oak Ridge National Lab, so the partnership programs have been less robust over the decades. But in 2011, Jimmy Cheek, the chancellor, and Daryl Cohorst started meeting a working group. I was involved in that. Turns out that with all this discussion, 9 UT colleges became involved in partnerships with UT. A kind of joint faculty agreement was signed. A new energy management graduate program was initiated and taught in Oak Ridge. Assistantships for 30 different students were given to work at Y12. And this is really good. And then in 2022, Gene Sievers and Deborah Crawford announced a $10 million agreement to foster more involvement of UT in Y12 in helping to drive implementation of new technologies. So that partnership is growing. What we have learned all this in 80 years is that you've got to have support from smart people at all levels to make such a university national laboratory partnership grow. You need support from governors and university presidents and chancellors and lab directors. And you need people at lower levels sacrificing their own accomplishments to build a partnership. And you need to figure out how to share people and resources and facilities. And you need to maintain an interdisciplinary emphasis in the joint programs. You see, universities are disciplinary by nature, departments of physics and chemistry and English and so on. National laboratories are interdisciplinary by nature. And we were studying, when I was still directing the Science Alliance, groups from New Mexico and state of Washington came to study us. How did you do this? How did the Breslin Center get formed? How did you build these joint programs between the state university and a big national lab? Well, we figured this out because of all I've discussed here. And they were trying to implement that, copy that with Los Alamos and with Idaho National Lab. In the future is bright. Supercomputing will continue to be an area of strength, helping many fields of research. A new thing is quantum information science. Quantum information science applies to various topics. It might provide the next vehicle for supercomputing, as there's a limit to how many chips how many integrated circuits you can put on a chip to make bigger and bigger supercomputers. We may be bucking up against that physical limit, but maybe quantum computers will be the future. Electric vehicles will be an important area of joint research in the future. In fact, Volkswagen of America has formed a innovation hub on the UT's Cherokee campus, focused on electric vehicle R&D to feed their electric vehicle production plant in Chattanooga. Neutron science will continue to be a strength. Nuclear reactors. Reactors are back. The country is shutting down power reactors right and left because natural gas is cheap, and the reactors will gradually run out of their operating licenses after 40 or 50 or 60 years. Well, there's companies in Oak Ridge that are trying to build the next generation of reactors, maybe even molten salt reactors, which was Alvin Weinberg's favorite scheme, but not followed in the 60s and 70s. Fusion. Gee whiz, there's fusion companies locating in Oak Ridge. And maybe, in fact, there will be fusion reactors on the grid generating electricity in the US by 2050 or 60. Who knows? I think that will happen. Direct capture of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Even if we all stop burning fossil fuel now abruptly, it will continue to warm on Earth because of all the CO2 we have already put in the atmosphere. That's a no-brainer. That's going to happen. One way to ameliorate that is to double the number of forests on Earth, because trees suck up CO2 in the photosynthesis process. Well, we're not going to double the number of forests on Earth because the populations are growing. Right. We've cut down forests, so we're not going to double the number. So another way is to do a chemical reaction to capture directly CO2 from the atmosphere. Well, that's not going to happen now or in the next 5 years, but at ORNL, there's research on different chemical schemes to maybe allow eventually big plants to be built to use some chemical processes to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. And the last area I want to mention was Back to the Future. Y-12 was built on using calutrons to separate isotopes, enrich isotopes. Well, we're back to the future now. At ORNL, a new stable isotope enrichment lab is being built. We've been out of that business in the US since the 1980s. Well, we're getting back into the business. My last point is that the Oak Ridge Innovation Institute at UT was formed in 2020. New money from the state, new money from Department of Energy. Lamar Alexander was crucial at getting the federal award. This is the future, this Innovation Institute. In fact, in February recently, two joint directions, were awarded $20 million each. One in bioeconomy systems, a way to have low carbon agriculture done that would feed low carbon manufacturing. And the other was in radiopharmaceutical therapies, new therapies involving treatment, diagnostic drugs, and treatment drugs involving alpha particle emitters, radioisotopes. So the future is bright, I feel. In a sense, what I've tried to show is that UT needed the formation of Oak Ridge to progress into being a top university. Oak Ridge needed UT to enrich its programs of education and to help its employees and to do joint research. Now, the people that have built this partnership over 80 years are either dead or retired. I'm retired, many others retired, but I'm greatly encouraged that there's a new team of leaders dedicated to building this partnership as we approach year 100. Stephen Streifer is the new director of the lab. David Scholl is essentially what I did, directing a bigger version of the President's Center. Randy Boyd, the president. Donnie Plowman is the chancellor. So I think the future is bright. Our book, once again, will be out in July. When Ray and I and Al and Bill started writing this, I thought, geez, we'll sell 10 copies, but we needed to do this anyway. Well, UT Press is very excited about this book, and Ray, we might sell more than 10. We'll see.
I believe it will sell more. I think, Lee, that you demonstrated in this presentation, but also in even greater detail in the book. We're bringing out a story here that really needs to be understood, because it's not limited to UT and Oak Ridge. These kind of things can be developed in other areas. And you're right. I think the future is very bright for Oak Ridge and for UT.
Yep, we'll see. So I guess you and I won't be here when the partnership reaches age 100. Well,
Probably not, but we will have helped to bridge the gap and to bring the information out and make it available.
Right. Well, thank you. I greatly enjoyed doing this and seeing you two wonderful guys.
Well,
Appreciate it. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate it. All right, Ray, what do we have coming up next? Do we know yet?
Well, I'm working on a connection with Emily Strasser, who wrote the book, The Half-Life of a Secret. She has won an award from the environmental law group. I can't remember the exact name, but it's the Reed Environmental Writing Award. And she was presented that just this week. And I'm trying to contact her and see if she will come on and let us talk about her book. We've had her on before, you recall, and she talked about the book, but I'd like for her to catch us up on what she's currently doing and to give her some recognition on that award. I think it's pretty good for her to be in that position and to receive that award.
All right, well, that sounds good. So we're getting ready to come up in April.
Yeah.
In April or the early part of May on our 100th episode. So over the last 4 years that we've been doing these, a couple of months. So,
that's remarkable. That's really remarkable. I applaud you two gentlemen.
Well, thank you. So we're going to try to figure something unique and special.
Yeah, I have an idea that I think we ought to consider, and that is, of all of the 90 plus and close to 100 episodes, the one that has been viewed the most has been from Alan Carr at Los Alamos, the historian at Los Alamos. He does a really good job of presenting information, and he and Bree Steves are writing a book that's coming out of Los Alamos. And I would like for us to just celebrate our 100th episode by bringing the most viewed guests that we have back. Okay. So unless you come up with a much bigger idea, that's what I hope we can do, is to bring Bree and Alan on and celebrate our 100th episode with them.
All right. Well, that sounds great. All right. Well, folks, we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Thanks for watching Hidden History.